Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about composing the images that we created in Enscape using Photoshop. So first I brought in a rendering that I had from one of my scenes in Enscape, and I'm also going to bring in all these other channels that we created in the channel videos. And drag those in and just kind of place them all. I'm just hitting enter on the keyboard. I find it easier to line them up after they've been, or for whatever reason, it works better. Line them up after they've been placed in the file. Oops. And so just kind of line them up so they should all kind of be perfectly lined up on top of our base image there. Okay. So the next order of business would be if we want to crop our image at all based on size of our frame here. So I've got a little bit of a odd balance with how this is framed. So I'm going to bring it into the middle here. This kind of might help me also compose a little bit about how the image is subdivided. Okay. And then we can also, if we want to, depending on the resolution of the image you originally exported, this one in its original resolution is about 2500 pixels by 1200 pixels. If I go to image up at the top and go to image size here and make sure I'm in pixels there, it should give me some idea of the resolution of my image. That's now that I've cropped it, it's a little less than 2K, so that's pretty good for what I want to do. Just keep in mind that 150 is pixels per inch is kind of a minimum that you want to do for printing or presentation. So depending what paper size or what size your image will be on the paper, I should say, you want to kind of use that 150 to figure out how big you're going. So if I was doing kind of an 8.5 by 11 size, I would use that 11 inches times 150 to find out that I have about 1650 pixels in width to fill that space with a decent resolution. So pretty good. I'm not going to change it, but it's also a good idea to turn it down when possible, just to save on how fast you'll be able to work in Photoshop and how large your file will be, which you can also see down. Okay. So the next steps I usually take will be to kind of adjust just the kind of composition of the image in terms of color and in terms of contrast. I find it's best to do that using adjustment layers. Over here on the right-hand side in my layers panel, there's a little circle that's half black, half white. And if I open that, I can get to all the adjustments, the same adjustments I have up in the image adjustments panel. Because I don't have a layer selected, it won't let me do. Visible layer selected. So all these things that you can reach in here can also be found in the layers panel. And what's nice about using them in the layers panel is they remain editable. They're not kind of permanent. So a couple things I like to do, first of all, just to kind of play with the brightness and this here. So all these, I should point out, brightness, contrast levels, curves, exposure, all deal with kind of light and dark shades and exposure values and so on and so forth. So I usually like to throw a curves on there and kind of adjust the contrast of my image a little bit. Like I said, what's nice about this is I can then toggle my curves and kind of see the effect. So you can see it's already bringing out more depth and more color in my image. So that helps. One thing that some people like to do, this image actually already has kind of I think because of the time of day that the sun is set to, it already has a kind of distinctive color to it. It's kind of a dusty reddish brown color. In order to play with colors, we can go in here under hue and saturation again, the way that these adjustments work is they just affect anything below them in the layers panel. If we want them to affect only a specific layer, we can hold Alt on the keyboard and click between those layers. And therefore now this is only going to affect that background image. But for now, I'm just kind of adjusting the overall composition, so I'll keep it affecting the whole thing. So hue saturation is useful. We can obviously crank up the saturation. So there, I find this useful actually just to sometimes help me see what color my image is and what color, oftentimes once you're done photoshopping and putting in a bunch of montage and stuff like that, you can end up with a bunch of different colors. So you'll get a kind of weird palette. So I find it helpful to just crank it all the way up and kind of see what's going on. So we can see we have a pretty deep orange going on there. And let's say if we wanted it to look a little bit more like kind of midday or something like that, we'd probably go towards like a blue or white color. There we go. So now if I and at that point I might also go for something a little bit less saturated. Well, so you can see that has a big effect on on the quality of light in the scene, as well as our perception of what time of day it is. And that's kind of one of those like kind of atmosphere things. So I might also then, it wants to be lighter if it's kind of that bluer, whiter, something more like that. So you can see what kind of effect that has. That obviously changes the image quite a bit. And I think it's useful to use a very specific kind of color tone to kind of help make the image cohesive. Another way to do this, other than hue and saturation, delete the actual layer here, is to use something called a photo filter, also an adjustment right down there where it says photo filter. So we can use a warming filter, a cooling filter. Same idea. It changes the overall color tone of the image. That's pretty close to what we had with our hue and saturation. So those are just kind of things to help you get the overall image to look okay. And then, if you find that you're having issues, getting part of your image to look correct, let's say I wanted this wall to look a little bit different because I'm losing some of the detail on it because it's too dark. That's again where our channels would come in handy, because we can easily start to go in here and select objects separately. Obviously, this is all one object, so that means we can't do it quite all at the same time. But if we use our Magic Wand tool, and I have that object ID turned on, and I'll click on this kind of tan color, and then I'll just swap to my rectangular select tool. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Hold Alt on the keyboard to deselect. I think you can also we'll hold Alt and then kind of go just like that. Get a little bit up in there, which we don't really sure why that is. Okay. And so then with that selection created, I could go in here and make another adjustment layer, and I'll do exposure. And then I would be just adjusting what's going on in that selection there. And so that when I made an exposure adjustment with that selection created, it automatically made what's called a layer mask, which is the same as clicking this button down here that has a little circle inside a square. And again, so that's kind of a black and white mask that affects the visibility of the layer that it's attached to. And so if I hold Alt and click on that guy, I can kind of be transported into where I can see exactly what's going on in that layer. And so in this layer, everything is grayscale. Anything white is visible, anything black is invisible, and everything in between kind of semi-transparent. And we can adjust or paint directly on this layer. So if I go to my paintbrush or hit B on the keyboard, and then I swap over to black, see I have a couple little weird stray spots there that are painted white. And then to get back out of this, I'll hold Alt on the keyboard and just left click back in that layer mask. And you can also hold Shift and left click in it to kind of temporarily turn it off. So you can see there it's actually affecting the whole image when I temporarily turn it off. And then obviously if I just want to adjust whether I can see that adjustment at all, I just turn the visibility of the layer on and off. Okay, so that's kind of general basics. The other thing that's really helpful about these material and object ID channels is that it makes it a lot easier for us to insert backgrounds, insert like images of trees or people. You know, if I wanted to Photoshop someone standing behind this railing, that would make my life a lot easier to be able to just go in there and select just those little lines rather than having to crop each one out, which would be really annoying. So I'm going to do that right now really quick. I'm going to insert a background and I'm going to insert a scale figure really quick here. So I can go on Google. I'm just going to search cutout people, go to images. I like to, you know, if you're having trouble, you can't find someone that's a good enough resolution, you can go to tools and go to size, select large. This should be okay for what we're doing right now. And the other thing to just be mindful of here is so if we're going to place somebody up there, for example, the light is primarily coming from the left-hand side of the scene, and the space up there is mostly, looks like it's mostly going to be in shade or in shadow. So we just want to be mindful of that when we're picking people. So, you know, a lot of these people will have kind of high contrast. This person's obviously standing in direct sun. These people less so, right? We want to kind of select someone that's going to make sense with where our light is coming from and what kind of light quality we have in that location. So let's just go get to one of these websites here. Okay. So we're going in circles. We can try a different one. One of these might work. Right, and then we'll save it. I'm just going to throw that in my folder here. Right, and then I'll bring it to Photoshop. And I just turn it back to that makes more sense with how our light angles are working. I'll just drag that image in. I can place it as many times as needed. I mean, the other thing to be mindful of course, is the what people are wearing, right? And whether or not that might make sense in your scene. But so another thing to pay attention to is when you drag stuff in, it becomes what's called a smart object. We can see these little icons on our layer. That means it's still linked to the file that's saved in my folder, and it's going to limit my ability to edit. So all I got to do is right-click on that layer and just click rasterize layer. So that little icon goes away, and now I can have a little bit more flexibility to edit. I'm gonna, let's say, take this roll here. Okay. So I'm going to use my quick select tool there. Select the white background. And like this stuff. And then I will go to any one of our selection tools, right click on the selection I have there and go to select inverse. That'll select the figure rather than the background. And then I'll use that layer mask button that I mentioned before. And that should crop out the background more or less. You can see it's a little bit messy still. So if we wanted to kind of refine our selection there, I can right click on the layer mask, go to select and mask, and down here where it says shift edge, I can kind of drag that to the left a little bit. Not sure that did what I wanted it to. It went the opposite way. Try that one more time. Right click, select and mask. Okay, so that's expanding. I'm gonna subtract. One thing that I also find smooth buttons kind of smooths the edge there. Okay. Yeah. Not quite perfect, but a little bit better, so we can also clean it up manually here a little bit. I just went to my brush tool and I'm drawing in black here. Cool. And so like I was saying, place her, I'll just hit Control T to free transform. And so if I wanted to crop out, oh, I got the wrong layer mask, I think. Anyway, so I can use my object ID mask instead. I'm going to select all these colors here. Okay. And then so now I'm actually adding another kind of layer of cropping. One thing I sometimes will do if I don't want to lose the original cropped image there is I'll just group the layer. So right click on the whole layer there, group. And then I can apply a transparency mask to the group. And you can see it cropped out the stuff that I actually wanted to keep. So if I just switch over to my layer mask there, and hit Control I on the keyboard to invert my image. I'll alt click on my layer again, turn off that. There we go. And now you can see our scale figure is kind of cropped as if she were standing behind that railing. And so not a lot of contrast or direct light showing up on her. One of the other things you'll probably want to do with each scale figure you insert is make sure they're kind of cohesive with the amount of light you have in your scene and the color of the scene. Like I mentioned before, we can create a photo filter. I'm just going to apply it to that layer. See which one of these work best. And we can also drag it over to the right to make the effect a little stronger there. Okay. We could also desaturate her. Yep. Very good. And then one of the other things that some people like to do is we can kind of, I forgot to mention. So when you create a layer mask, it's automatically linked to the position of the layer. And that's what that little link icon looks like, means between the layer mask and the layer itself. So if I move her around, I move my group around, you can see that the cropped railing goes with the object. And if I want that not to happen, so if I want to reposition her, but I don't want to recrop the railing, I just click on the little link. And so now, now whenever I move my scale figure around, she'll show up as behind those railings. Obviously, there's some other weird stuff on here that I need to get rid of. Okay. All right. And then one other thing, maybe I'll add one more quick scale figure real quick. So right back. Okay, so I found another scale figure here. And you can see she appears more as if she's kind of standing in direct sun there. Now she's actually on the same level as our viewer. So one thing we can do here is kind of figure out roughly where our horizon line is. There. Like that. So she's just about at the right height right there, actually. So the trick is to kind of use your vanishing point because we're looking at eye level. Every other scale figure that's standing should be roughly around the horizon line on this level, and anyone else can you can kind of trace where they're intersecting with the vanishing point. And so again, we can see we've placed her here, but obviously it looks like the light's coming from the other direction on her. And oops, I meant to not up her between. Okay, and so my first move would be Control T on the keyboard to transform. I think you can also go to the marquee tool, rectangular selection tool, right click on there, or on your layer, go to free transform. Right click one more time, and I'm going to go flip vertical. Oops, not flip vertical, flip horizontal. Okay, so now our scale figure is looking in the other direction. That looks cool. Okay. So I'm going to copy just a couple of things I did before, like the photo filter to kind of get the color to look right a little bit. Probably borrow the saturation as well. Okay. Oops. Okay. The color kind of fits a little bit smoother there. Another thing that some people like to do is if we wanted to kind of shade her a little bit so she fit in with the scene even more, or just so that there was kind of more contrast, more drama on our scale figures, one thing that we can do here is we can make a new layer. And that's just our little page button there. I'm going to drag that to the top. And I'm going to start drawing on this layer just with my paintbrush. And so I'm going to draw in white and black and just kind of emphasize some of the contours. And then I'll use that as an adjustment. And so if I go to my drop down menu for how that layer is going to mix, first of all, I'm going to hold Alt and click between the layers. And now you can see that those colors I drew are only showing up kind of where they overlap the layer to which they're applied. And if I go to some of my mixing options here, I can start to play around with how that's going to look for me. Some of the ones that'll give us a good result there for a scale figure, for a layer that has both dark and light on it. Some of the ones in here usually work the best. So like soft light always works well. Or overlay sometimes does well. They tend to bump up contrast as well as lightness and darkness. For example, we can see the darken layer does well for and screen does well for the lighter stuff. So you can separate the dark and the light if you want. You can also, of course, toggle down the opacity a little bit. That just makes our scale figure a little more cohesive with the environment there. We can kind of see the effects of that. So she fits in our scene a little bit nicer as a result. Oops. Okay. And we could do the same with that one. But just to kind of quickly wrap up with this video, I wanted to also show then how to insert a backdrop. I'll go back here. I'll just search sky background. If you want, you can also search the location. Maybe you want to search the time of day as well. Probably don't want one of these like super intense orangey ones, if we're honest. There's one that's not bad. And then I often find it helpful when I'm searching for skies, because they usually have to kind of span my whole image or the background of my whole image. I go to Tools and Size, choose Large. And that should limit well, it's not very large, is it? I go to the website here. Let's try this one. Obviously, that is quite large. So also when you float your cursor over the image, it'll show you in the bottom left corner what the resolution is there. Let's try this one. Work out great. Try. Okay, so I'm gonna drag that guy in. This file, yep. Okay, so I want this one to be way, way down. I actually probably want it to be behind my background, so I'm gonna double click that background image to release it. Or sorry, the rendering itself to release it from the background. I can go ahead and place my sky behind. And then I'm also going to turn on one of my material or object ID channels. I'm going to go to Magic Wand. Just make sure I'm actually on that layer. Click on the black. Make sure I have contiguous turned off so that it selects all the black at once. And I'm going to crop out. I could then also right click and go to Select Inverse. Save myself a step. And select the layer of my rendering and crop out the background. There we go. So now our sky is the background. You can see that obviously changes things quite a bit. I like to try and get it, roughly at the right horizon line so that the clouds and everything look sort of right. And I would then also go back in here and insert, once I'm done with kind of the foreground, I would insert context images, adjacent buildings, neighborhood images, that kind of thing, to kind of cover up what's happening. Obviously, we're not kind of in the middle of the desert here, so I would kind of cover up the sky background with that stuff. But in order to illustrate this, I'm going to do the same. Before, I'll create a photo filter. That to kind of so my image is looking a little bit more correct. Right, and we could take that really extreme if we want to. Same basic moves, hue and saturation and photo filter. Okay. Great. Okay, and then that's going to wrap up this video. Oh, I spoke too soon. One last thing I want to mention is how to create shadows for our scale figures. So if I go back to this scale figure, pretty easy to do. I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard, and I'm going to left click on the image if I already have that image cropped. If it's more like what we're doing with this scale figure, which we wouldn't see her shadow, but so we could, because she has a image mask applied, we can't directly select the outline of what we're seeing there. So we could go onto our layer here and just use and I would select contiguous here to just select what we have that's visible there for that scale figure. So once we have the selection or the outline of our figure, and I'll just go back to this scale figure because she would actually have a shadow. Then I'm going to just make a brand new layer. I'm going to apply or actually what I'll do is I'll just get my paint bucket tool, that's G on the keyboard, or this guy, go to black and fill in black. Now that's underneath, which is why we can't see it right now. So there's our kind of shadow. So then we'll take that shadow that we've just created, retransform, right click and go to distort. So now what I'm looking at is does the base of the shadow where it aligns to our scale figure kind of match up, and does the direction of the shadow kind of match up, the direction and length of the shadow, which I'm just kind of referencing by eye what we have over there. And so, you really can just kind of use the lines of the perspective. So you see I'm drawing this edge towards that vanishing point, and I'm drawing these edges towards that vanishing point. That right, there we go. And when I'm happy with that, I'll press enter. And just like I did when I kind of did that overlay and messed with the contrast on this figure, I'm going to go to my mixing option here and change it to, so soft light can be good. It tends to pick up more of the color of whatever it's being cast onto. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just copy the layer a bunch of times. That helps. And then you can always just do one that's like normal, just turn down the opacity a little bit. So that looks kind of, so we're getting some of the color of what's in the image of the surface that the shadow is being cast on. And obviously this is pretty straightforward because that's just kind of a gradient on the ground plane right now, and then I can just select all three of those layers and right click and go to, actually no, I think I can't do that. But I can select two of them and merge them. I changed my mixing. There we go. And so I actually, once you get into this level of detail with inserting scale figures, you want to just go ahead and group everything. Self-organize, you have a million layers. And so there we have it. All right, so in another video, we'll talk about how to insert materials in your scene through Photoshop, how to tweak the lighting in Photoshop, and how to do vegetation and context.